Hello and welcome to the OT Schoolhouse Podcast, your source for the latest school-based occupational therapy tips, interviews, and research. Now, to get the conversation started, here are your hosts, Jason and Abby. Class is officially in session.
Hey there, and welcome back to the OT Schoolhouse Podcast. Today's episode is now number 6. We've been doing this for like over 2 months now, Abby. This is awesome. We're already on episode number 6.
I know, it's suddenly like hot outside.
It's actually a little overcast over here, but it is warming up, that is for sure. So how are you doing today, Abby?
I'm good. I'm ready to talk about some OT assessments.
Very
That's what's on the menu today.
Exactly. So with that, today, we're talking about the BOT, the one that I'm going to just butcher right now and say the Bruininks-Oseretsky test of motor proficiency, second edition.
How many times? I mean, every time I go to sit in an IEP meeting to say to a parent, and the test that I conducted was the Bruininks. Like, I have to practice it in my head before it actually comes out my mouth.
Do you actually say it in IEPs?
Yeah. I don't
just say the BOT2.
Yeah, but nobody knows what that is.
Well, I tell them. I say the reason I'm calling it the BOT2 is because I don't know how to pronounce it.
Oh, well, I always try to pronounce it, and I always fail at it.
All right. Well, good. A for effort. All right. So today we are going to talk a little bit about the BOT2, and then we're also going to compare and contrast the BOT2, which I believe most of you would all agree that it is a very commonly used assessment in school-based therapy. A lot of us use it. The other one, I don't think it's quite as commonly used, but at least I use it pretty regularly. It's called the Miller Function and Participation Scales, also known as, for short, the MFUN, MFUN. So it's called the MFUN for a reason, because it's fun.
Well, it is fun. And we put the fun in function as OTs.
Yes. Yes.
Also, I'm a recent convert to the MFUN. I hadn't used it in the past until I met you, Jason. And then I recently started to use it, particularly with the younger kids. It's a really good tool.
Yeah. And we'll get into in this podcast what we like about each one, but we're also going to be objective and tell you about what tasks each test looks at, what different skills they look at, how they relate to education, and well, yeah, eventually we'll kind of give you, you'll kind of hear a little bit of bias come out as to which one we like. But there are also reasons that we do like and use the BOT. So we'll get into that. Before we jump into that, we're going to go over today. We're going to do something a little bit different from the other 5 episodes. We're going to give you the objectives for today's episode. And the objectives, I'm just going to read them here for you. They are for all of you listeners to have an understanding of what skills both the BOT2 and the MFUN assess in a child's educational capabilities. Number 2, what the pros and cons are of each assessment tool. And 3, how to decide which assessment tool is best suited for any given school-based OT assessment. So by the end of the episode, we hope you will feel that you have met those 3 expectations that we're trying to meet for you. If you don't feel that we did that, please shoot us an angry email. We will do our best to
maybe not an angry email,
right,
like a constructive criticism email, like something that's constructive criticism. That would be perfect. I'm all about constructive criticism. But also, I think too, it's important. These aren't the only 2 assessments. These are the 2 we're going over today. We're not really promoting them or not promoting them. We're just kind of reviewing them.
Correct. And to follow up what I just said, if you do like what we go over today, please, and you feel that we do meet our objectives, please give us a shout out to one of your friends, colleagues, let them know about this podcast. So with that, you know what? I think we are going to jump right in. We are going to start off with the BOT first. It's a little more well-known, and we're going to give you our take on it and let you know a little bit more about it. So first, we want to kind of go over what the BOT is, what skills each task looks at, and the different subtests that are within the BOT2. So, Abby, how about you go ahead and go over those for a little bit?
Oh, sure. So the Bruininks-Oseretsky test of motor proficiency.
That was really good, I might add.
Thank you. I nailed it. got it, is administered amongst multiple subtests, and they're goal-directed activities that look at a wide range of motor skills. And it looks at it for individuals ages 4 through 21. There are different subtests, and you can use each individual subtest to get a scaled score. And then it also looks at composite scores that give you a standard score. And so I really like the BOT-2. I use it frequently because I'm familiar with it and I can administer it pretty easily. Like I said, I'm a recent convert to the MFUN. So I tend to go with tests, standardized tests that allow me easy use. So if I'm familiar with it, I know I'm more likely to get an accurate score because I've administered it so many times. So when you're looking at which test to pick, that might be something you want to look at.
All right. So the fine motor precision tool or task is the first subtest. It belongs within the broader fine manual control subtest. What are some of the tasks in the fine motor precision test?
Right. So the fine motor precision test looks at your precise movement of those small muscles in your hands and control of those finger and hand movement. So it requires you to do things such as color in small shapes, fold paper on the line with accuracy, cut out a circle within a specific boundary, looks at tracing through a path or a maze, and connecting 4 dots. It's measuring the accuracy of your movements.
Correct.
Mostly.
It also, I take it also as, one, it's measuring a 2-step activity, or at least I get a general sense of that because
That's true.
You're asking them to connect the dots and not lift up their pencil. And it also does look at how they're able to plan their forearm movement in order to see where the dots are without taking their pencil off the paper.
Right. And I think, too, with the small shapes, you can get a good observation of that distal control of their fingers. You know, if they're using whole hand movement or if they're using big wrist movement, that's going to really come out when they're coloring in those shapes. That also comes out with the maze. If they're a kid, we've talked about this before. These are just observations. They're not directly measured in the score that you get for the kid, but these are areas that you can observe through each task and just kind of make a little note for your narrative parts of your report. So, for instance, like I think we talked about this before when we're observing a kid do the mazes, how that kid, I've had students where they're moving their whole body while they're doing the maze. So instead of just moving their hand, they're moving their whole body around the maze. And you can see them where they don't want to cross their midline. They're almost using their whole body as a unit. And you can see that. Or if they're trying to turn the booklet and move it and manipulate it, because you can only turn it, 45 degrees,
45
correct?
degrees, yep.
So you can gain a good understanding of those areas. And those are just little observations you can make while they're doing it. And that can impact their function in the classroom. So they're not directly measured by the test, but that is measured or an area that you can observe while they're doing each of the tasks.
Yeah. So that's the fine motor precision. Fine motor integration, this one is a lot like some other tests, such as the VMI, the visual motor integration, Barry's VMI, as well as the wide range of visual motor abilities, the RAVMA, which looks at the ability to copy shapes. The one thing that I do like about the BOT versus some of those other tests is that the scoring criteria is more specific in the BOT. For instance, copying a circle, you look at it, does it have a basic shape of a circle? Does it have closure? So are the lines touching or do they cross at the end or at the beginning and the end of the circle? Is it more like an oval, or are the edges, quote unquote, edges for a circle? Is it pretty regular across and height wise? And then you also look at the overall size, which is very important. Recently, actually, there was a question on Facebook recently as to whether or not you would score the circle or any shape on the fine motor integration test if the shape went outside of the little box that they give you to write in. I've always scored it that, yes, even if they go outside the box, you still score it as though it's in the box. I've had that some kids, when they're drawing the star, they'll get to the edge of the box, and then instead of continuing on, they'll kind of draw a line up, or they'll move it because of the box. And so you get a lot of information from looking at that. But as far as scoring goes, I've always scored it even if they go outside of the box.
Right. And then just making a note of it. I think it's just important. You just make a note. the child went outside the box, or maybe the position of the shape was off, because that could denote like a bit of a planning issue or just not attending to things. So, but no specific difficulty on those subtests, I think, directly indicates an issue. You have to look at it because that's a snapshot of what they're doing. So you have to pair that observation. Yeah. And it just might be something that and then on classroom observations and in work samples and talking to the teacher, you might want to look for other signs that can be functionally impacting them.
Correct. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with the BOT, the subtest number 2, the fine motor integration that we're talking about, it looks at a child's ability to copy a circle, a square, overlapping circles that kids often confuse for the number 8, a wavy line that looks like a sideways S, a triangle, a diamond, a star, and overlapping pencils, which is kind of a common shape for some reason among tests. I don't know why.
It really is, isn't it? It's on the BOT and the VMI.
Yep.
I don't think there's one on the RAVMA.
No, not on the RAVMA.
No.
So that is the fine motor integration portion of the test. The next most commonly used subtest, a lot of OTs I know don't use all the subtests on the BOT. It does get into more of those gross motor skills that a PT might look at later in the test. But the next one that most of us do use is the manual dexterity score. The manual dexterity. I think most people use that one. I commonly see that on incoming students with OT assessments, and I use it probably about 85 to 90% of the time as well, unless for some reason I absolutely don't think there is a specific fine motor concern. But within the manual dexterity scores, you have 5 tasks. One is basically as quick as the child can. They put a dot into these small circles, and there's like 100 circles on the page. Most kids get to like 15 or so. Because
Did you count them all?
I did not. But I think there's about 100. I'm just going to go with 100.
No, I think it's a safe assumption.
Maybe 98. But the next test after that is transferring pennies. The kid has to pick up a penny with one hand and flip it over, or transfer it to the other hand and then put it in a box. The next one is placing pegs into a pegboard with one hand. Number 4 is sorting cards. There's some cards that have blue circles and other cards that have red squares, and you have to put them in the respective pile with one hand. And the last one is stringing blocks. And of course, that is a two-handed task.
Oh, that's not one? No, I'm just kidding. That would be so hard. Okay.
It would be. So for each of these tasks, you get 15 seconds to have the child perform these tasks. And you are supposed to give them a little direction and practice before you actually test them. And then on all of them, except for the making dots and circles, you actually assess the test twice to try and get their best score.
Yep.
So what do you like and not like about these few tests, Abby?
I think some things to look out for. One, on the manual dexterity, I have a lot of little experimenters when we're doing the manual dexterity test. So they like to try and test the best way to do things, and they'll experiment with how they're going to do it. Even though I've directed them and they've done the practice round okay, it seems like when I time them, they think they're going to outsmart me with some sort of random thing, which inevitably makes them slower. So
especially on the stringing blocks.
Yes. So I often preface my directions. Yeah, the blocks, they all want to line them up and then see if they can get that string through like 6 at once, which is never something that is going to happen. It never works. And so I will preface with, I'm going to show you the fastest way to get this done.
Oh, that's a good little tidbit.
Yeah. So I'll just kind of, to save myself time and headache of having to, constantly redirect or restart the assessment or do something like that, because the more they practice, the faster they're going to be. So then that impacts the reliability of the score or the validity of the score. I will preface it with, I'm going to show you the fastest, easiest, best way to get this done. And if you don't do it this way, I can't count it and we will have to start over. I'm just pretty direct with that to try and get them to understand that concept. I think the other area that you always have to look for is I have kids that just, even though I've shown them and on the practice section with those circles, those darn circles, they just don't want to put like a little poke in the circle. They want to color it in a little dot. And that just makes it
slows them down.
Slows them down.
Yeah.
Or the opposite, where they just want to go through and be like, dot, 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 like super fast.
Correct. And, I wouldn't mind these because you also can't put 2 dots in one circle. If they put 2 dots in one circle, it doesn't count. Right. But that's one of the areas with this testing that I kind of have a little discrepancy with is one, because of the timing. The timing makes kids typically either they get super anxious, they don't understand the timing, or they just kind of shut down. And then what I do like about it is that you do get to see a lot in your clinical observations while watching this test that isn't actually scored, such as that crossing midline. It's not actually scored on the test whether or not they can cross midline, but you can watch a kid, and on a lot of these tests, transferring pennies, you don't actually cross midline, but they do have to cross from one hand to the other hand. Yep. But on the sorting cards one and the pegboard, they do have to cross midline, and you can see stuff like that.
Oh yeah, and then you can warrant further observation of functional skills. So whatever it is that they're having trouble with, like you see those kids that they don't want to transfer the penny between their hands. Instead, they hold the penny with both hands and then drop it into the container. And they do that. They bring it to their other hand and then they put both and drop it in. And it's those little things that you observe for that could be impacting them functionally. So and like I said, every assessment is a snapshot. So those are just little observations that might warrant further investigation.
Correct. So moving on past the manual dexterity, we get to subtest number 4, which is bilateral coordination. Now, this is one that I know not every OT assesses every student with. I do typically see subtest number 1, 2, and 3 on just about every single occupational therapy evaluation that comes across my desk as a transfer in. The rest of them I don't always see, but I do use some of them, and I know other OTs do occasionally use some of them, depending on what their observations are of the child. So subtest number 4 is bilateral coordination, and this includes some tasks such as seeing if a student can do jumping jacks, seeing if they can touch their nose with their index fingers, eyes closed. This is basically, the typical drunk driving test. Can you reach out with your fingers and bring your finger to your nose? They only have to do it 4 times, but the officer may want a few more than 4 times. But and then the other ones are some sort of jumping in place, or the next 2 are jumping in place. And while you jump in place, you're moving your hands and your feet. Sometimes you're moving your right hand with your right foot, and other times you're moving your right hand in the opposite direction of your right foot and left and vice versa. So it's got some bilateral coordination, definitely, as the test's name suggests. It also has a lot of planning.
Yeah, and I think you have to really look at, when you're looking at the bilateral coordination subtest, you really have to have an understanding. So if that child receives speech, you really need to know what that speech therapy assessment says, because if they're receptively not understanding directions, it may not be a coordination issue or a planning issue. It may be that they just really don't understand what you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
All the time. And so that's just something to consider. They may need more practice or whatnot. And at times, I'll do these, like this subtest, only if I'm hearing that they're having problems with certain tasks, functional tasks. So, or I've observed them have problems with certain functional tasks, like being out at recess or in gym class or something like that. But if they're not having those problems, then I might not do this. Definitely. It depends on what the areas of need are.
Definitely. The last one that I do typically see on an occupational therapy evaluation is the upper limb coordination, which most people will know this is the ball test. You have a tennis ball and you're doing many different items with the tennis ball. You're having the child drop the tennis ball and catch it with one hand, with both hands, with their non-dominant hand. You're having them throw and catch the ball. And you're even having them, I think the hardest one is the dribbling the ball. That one's always tricky for kids. Either with their dominant hand, or when you have to switch hands, it even gets more tricky. So that's kind of what the upper limb coordination looks at.
Right. And I think if they're having trouble with tracking, or they have behaviors related to difficulties with tracking in the classroom, whether the teacher reports that they're skipping words when they're reading, or they're having trouble with that skill, I will look at this subtest, or I'll do activities related to tracking and then determine whether or not to do this subtest. Because I think sometimes if you're looking too heavily at standardized scores, you lose the function.
Definitely. You're right.
So, and a kid can look really bad on a standardized test score, but functionally they're very high. So just keeping that in mind.
I also use this subtest, especially the throwing of the ball, which is the final task of this test, at a red target, at a small target, is how a student is able to learn. Because especially when you're working with the younger kids, they haven't learned how to throw a ball. And you really get to see, are they able to learn from you teaching them such a gross motor activity? And I can only imagine how difficult it would be for a kid to learn something more complex in the classroom if they're having a difficulty just learning how to position their body and throw a baseball or a tennis ball. And so, it's not something that's actually scored within this test, but it is definitely some clinical observations that you're able to notate and give your results on in your report.
And I think just keeping in mind when you're doing the BOT, what is the purpose of your assessment? It's a school-based assessment. Mm-hmm. So you may need to detect all of these difficulties if it's impacting them in the classroom, but you may also not need to detect them.
Correct.
In a way, you want to assess we're only obligated to assess in all areas of suspected need. Mm. So if a kid's accessing their environment and they're able to do functional tasks kind of related to these things, even if their standardized test score is in the well below average range, if it's in the well below average, it probably is impacting them functionally. But if it's in the below average range, it may or may not impact them functionally.
Correct. So the other tests that are not commonly used by OTs is the subtest that is identified as balance. Number 6 is running speed and agility, and number 8 is strength. I rarely ever see those on an occupational therapy evaluation. I have seen an OT and a PT collaborate to do all of the tests together and do a multidisciplinary type of evaluation, but not too commonly do I see OTs doing those. On the back of the BOT, it's kind of cool. They have a short form. I think I've only used it once, but it does kind of break it down, and you only have... There's about 15 components that you do, and it does include a few of those gross motor ones. I don't necessarily recommend it. You get a much better snapshot of a student when you do the full form, but just do not the entire BOT. You do the fine motor and visual motor ones.
And I think it's really important to note here, too, when you talked about multidisciplinary assessments, I love multidisciplinary assessments.
We're going to have to do an assessment on that. Or assessment podcast.
Yeah, a podcast? What are you? No, anyway, so I just like them because I think it gives you a much better functional picture of a student versus just an OT assessment for that reason. So I like the BOT.
All right. So that took slightly longer than we expected. So we are going to jump in now to the MFUN, the Miller Function and Participation Scales, also known as the MFUN. So one thing that Abby touched upon with the BOT is that it does have a wide range. You can test a student from 4 years old all the way up to 21, which is quite nice because, if we're testing a student officially for the triennial every 3 years, you can rest assured that if you tested them 3 years ago with the BOT, you're going to be able to test them again 3 years later with the BOT and compare and contrast scores. With the MFUN, the ages that you can use the MFUN for is from 2.6, so 2.5 years old, which, not many school-based therapists are working with kids that young. Usually, we have some preschoolers that might be, 4, 3.5, 4. But it only goes up to 7 years, 11 months, which is pretty young. If you test a kindergartner, by the time they're in third grade, there's no given that you'll be able to use this assessment again. You might have to use the BOT once they turn 8 or some other assessment tool. So that's kind of one thing that's not as great about the MFUN. However, there are a lot of great things about it. So let's go over it.
Yay.
Yay.
I'm a recent convert to the MFUN, so I'm going to let Jason kind of school me up on it.
All right.
Because I am not as used to using the MFUN, but when I have used it with certain age populations, particularly kindergarten or those transitioning into kindergarten and preschool, I think it's a really good tool.
Yeah.
So
I really enjoy it. It's my first go-to test for any younger child that I think can actually get through it. It is a little bit longer of a test. It does take a little bit more attention, but it's fun. And so it tends to, even kids that are would have a little bit more trouble getting through the BOT, I think they enjoy the MFUN, so it helps them get through it a little bit better. So the MFUN has 4 components, really. The first component is the visual motor. The second component is the fine motor subtest. Then you have the gross motor subtest, which I don't use. However, every time I look at it, I think with like the next kid, I should do the gross motor part of it, because a lot of it is kind of things that you would see on the BOT, upper limb coordination, like the using of a ball, or the bilateral coordination, the jumping and balance part of it. So I will use it one time because it does seem pretty good. So I also, again, have seen OTs and PTs collaborate to do the gross motor test.
How would you say? Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I didn't mean to interject, but I think how do you think it compares? Have you used the Peabody developmental scales? Like, what do you think? Because the Peabody, I guess the Peabody goes up to, what, 6 years? It goes
up to 6, yeah. And so I like this one more because it's just more organized. The Peabody, you kind of have to jump around a little bit. It gives you a different type of score.
To get a ceiling and a basal level.
Exactly. It gives you the basal level and the ceiling. This one is more straightforward. It goes through. So I prefer this one for the kids that are a little bit older. Again, we don't have preschools, so I might try that one more with a preschooler. But by the time they get to kindergarten, I'm pretty much set on the MFUN unless they can't do the MFUN.
Well, and the MFUN looks a lot at like school-based tests.
Correct.
Specifically where the Peabody, it's more developmentally based.
Yes, definitely. And
hence the name.
and the last part of the MFUN is the checklist. It has a home checklist, a classroom checklist, and a test observations checklist. Again, don't use these as often. I find that my own narrative is better than going through the checklist and providing answers to those and then saying whether or not the child is average or below average according to the checklist. I would rather just give more feedback via a narrative in my report. And we were just looking up the validity and reliability of those checklists a minute ago before we started the podcast. And they actually, the subjective portions of the assessments, both the BOT and the MFUN, such as checklists and observations, are actually less valid and less reliable than the rest of the test overall. So in my opinion, I think Abby will agree with me, is just the narrative, being able to add a little bit extra to your report about what you observed during the test or in the classroom gives more than the formal observations from the test.
Yeah, and I think so long as you can defend your observations and keep them extremely objective, like just deliver the information, don't elaborate too much subjectively on what you think it means in your report, just deliver the information. This is what you observed, sort of remove your opinion out of it and save that for your recommendations and your summary, but also just noting that your opinion is highly subjective. So if you are doing your narrative and you choose not to use, checklists and that sort of thing because maybe you don't find them as reliable or because you feel like your narrative is more relatable, just remember to keep it objective in your report and keep it very specific to what you looked at functionally with the child, and then just be prepared to defend your observations.
Definitely.
You don't necessarily need a score for everything.
Exactly. So I'm going to run through a few of these tasks that are on the MFUN. It starts off in the visual motor task with it's called the Amazing Mazes game, and it's a maze with, one of them is a dog is trying to find her puppy. Can you help the dog find her puppy? And the kid has to go through a short maze. There's a total of 3 mazes. Each one gets a little more tricky, and so you kind of get that, where does the child fall? Do they fall on a maze? Do they fail on a maze that is kind of designed for 4-year-olds? Do they fail on a maze that's kind of designed for 5-year-olds? Or are they able to get through all of them? So that's a cool thing. The next one's a race car game in which you get to look at a little bit of that motor control and the ability to cross midline, because you're kind of going in a spiral. The kid has to trace a quote unquote road, as they call it, which is a thick gray line, to get all the way to the end. So it looks at some bilateral coordination skills. and motor accuracy. There's some visual processing skills where you have to find the hidden objects. There's the Find the Forks game as well as the Find the Puppies game. There's also one where you get to draw a kid. Actually, the assessor draws a kid, and then the student tries to copy your drawing and or draw their own person as well as they can.
Yeah.
Another great thing that I find about the MFUN, other than the bot, is that it actually specifically looks at handwriting. You start with tracing handwriting, then you move to copying some letters, then you move on to writing some letters from dictation. It's only 3, so it's not too difficult for the kids. You can pretty quickly determine if a kid can write letters from dictation or if they can't.
Yes, I love that part of it, actually.
Yeah, and the last 2 writing activities are copying simple words, 3-letter words, and then the most tricky one is copying about a 6-word sentence or so. Yeah, there might be a few more words, but it's not too it's not too long of a sentence. But you can definitely determine you can see a big difference between the ones that can do it and the ones that cannot do it.
And I'd say even on the sentence copying portion, it's very age appropriate in how they have it set up. You can tell whether or not they understand that double-lined paper because of how that task is set up.
Yes, definitely.
You can see have they learned to use that dotted line? And it's very age appropriate in the sense that you would expect, a 6 or 7-year-old to have been taught that. And if they're not able to do that task, you can tell pretty quickly. I like that part.
I agree with you. The second portion, or at least the fine motor portion of the test, is similar to the manual dexterity of the bot a little bit, except more functional, in my opinion. There's cutting out a fish instead of cutting out a circle. There is playing with clay and rolling clay into a snake and flattening it into a cookie. There is an origami game in which you see if a child can imitate your folds. You fold a dog and then the child folds a dog, so you can see whether or not they can imitate, they can use those fine motor skills in order to fold. One particular question is, does the student use 2 hands to fold, or do they only use 1 hand, or do they kind of use that second hand to fold? So that's kind of one of those questions that you get a lot from. There's a penny bank game, which gives you the opportunity to see a lot. You get to see crossing midline. Do they cross midline to pick up pennies? It also looks at in-hand manipulation skills. You put 5 pennies into the child's hand and see if they can get them out to put them into the piggy bank one at a time. Can they do it with 1 hand, or do they need to use their second hand to facilitate that movement of those small items? The last test is the snack time test, which Abby and I were just talking about this one. We kind of see it a little bit out of place because it's not necessarily looking at just fine motor skills, but it's also kind of cool because it gives you the opportunity to actually objectively score functional social communication, which that's not something that you get on many tests. So for instance, one of the descriptions is, does the student consistently demonstrate appropriate cooperation and attention? Which is kind of cool because you actually get that social skill aspect of the test. I know Abby had something to say about this.
Yeah, and I think just for me, I think it takes a little bit of practice and comfort level with the therapist using it. You might have to practice it a couple of times and definitely be prepared. The other thing I just wanted to touch on, even with the fine motor test and a little bit with the MFUN, unlike the bot, is it's almost the activities are super engaging for kids. I noticed. There's always the goal direction is fun. Like instead of just folding paper to fold paper, where a child might not put forth the effort because they don't really care about it or know what they're folding. There's no goal at the end of folding paper. It's just to fold the paper, just to fold it.
It sometimes looks like an alligator if it's folded correctly.
Yes,
an alligator mouth.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think with the MFUN, folding a doggy and putting the ears and doing that is more engaging, and the child's more likely to put forth an adequate effort that will give you a truer picture. And so anyway, back to snack time. What do you have to say about snack time? Sorry, I just was thinking about that. I was like,
no, that's a good, I like it.
That's
you're
why
absolutely
I like
correct.
The MFUN.
Snack time, it's a good one. You do see, can a child pour water from one cup to another cup? Can they dump their crackers onto a napkin without, making the the crackers go everywhere. So there are, again, some of those functional skills that a child would do in a classroom. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of nice. The thing that I really absolutely love about the MFUN versus the BOT and just about any other assessment tool I can think of is that they have this component called the Neurological Foundations Profile. And
yeah,
bear with me, this is kind of hard to explain, but based upon the scores on your test, if a child scores on a Likert scale, say, it's a 0 if the child didn't do it well at all, and it's a 3 if they did do it well. If they get a 0 or a 1, you circle something on this foundations profile, and based upon where you're circling, it tells you the exact foundational skills that you may want to work on with the child. So for instance, some of the foundational skills that you could potentially find that the student has difficulties with is hand strength, pincer grasp, in-hand manipulation, mature grasp, motor accuracy, motor planning, crossing midline, and bilateral coordination. So those are all specific tasks that the MFUN can weed out as far as what you may want to work on going forward. So that's really cool, in my opinion.
And then that way you're not developing treatment activities that are working on, we were talking about this pincer grasp or something like that, when really what you should be working on is, other areas like visual processing areas, such as visual discrimination or scan. It's very specific.
Yeah. So 2 examples would be the cutting in the BOT versus the cutting of a fish in the MFUN. The BOT scores the cutting as either a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 points, right? Versus the Miller actually looks at, is the child holding the scissors correctly? Are they using the second hand to turn the object while cutting? Do they cut within a given space, just like the BOT does? But you notice that there's more criteria to fill in and to observe and to take data on.
Right.
So that does make the MFUN take a little bit longer to actually administer and to score. But in my opinion, it's totally worth it because you do get so much more information that you can relay to other occupational therapists, to the parent, to the teacher, to the certified OT occupational therapy assistant that you can give that information to. So in my opinion, it's,
Well, and it helps with developing baselines and goals.
Exactly.
So if you're, if the kid is not holding their scissors correctly, that could potentially be a goal. If the child is, not cutting, doesn't understand cutting on the line around a boundary, that could be a goal, but they're holding their scissors correctly. You wouldn't work on scissor grasp. You would work on that. And it gives you a direct baseline so that, I have a shape. I have something that they weren't able to do. And the fish is much more, compared to the BOT, particularly for those younger kids, I think that fish is more engaging, but also just the whole cutting on the boundary around the shape, where the circle, some kids it's too difficult for the young ones.
Yeah. Well, plus the hardest part of the fish is actually when you get to the tail, you have to cut in and then cut out, which everyone knows that's like cutting a complex shape, and that's more tricky.
Yep.
So you do get to see a little bit more than just cutting out a simple circle. It's a little bit harder of an item to cut out, but it's more engaging and kids are more likely to actually try and cut it out.
Right.
So I think our biggest concern with the MFUN is just that it only goes up to 7 years, 11 months that you can test a student with. Unfortunately, it's not normed for older than that. Like any other test, yes, you could technically use it with an older student or an older child that is above that age, but make sure you're going to put into your notes, this test was used with a student outside of the designated age range, and that standardized scores cannot be really drawn from this testing, from your test, because it's not standardized for that age. However, you can get a lot of useful information from using the test with older kids as far as observation-wise.
Yeah. And do you think, I'm almost wondering if maybe part of the reason it goes not quite as high up in age as kids are kind of expected to have those skills by that certain age.
I think so.
By 8 years. So it probably, if I'm thinking of the subtests and all the things that they're asked to do developmentally, children should be able to do those skills by that age.
If they can do it at 8, then they can do it at 11. Type of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think you're right on that.
They should have mastered it, but it would be nice if it went up higher.
Who knows? Maybe they'll change it up a little bit and create a more middle school type one later down the road. That'd be cool.
Oh, yeah.
But anyways, the last objective that we wanted to get to is, we wanted to share with you and we've talked about it a little bit already, but we wanted to share with you how we decide which one we want to use. And so we have a list of a few things here we'll go over. And the first one is age. Of course, we just got done telling you about how the MFUN can only go up to 7-11. So if it's if the child is older than 7 years, 11 months, we're more likely to use the BOT.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Because if it's normed for a specific age group, you want to try and stay within what it's designed for.
Yeah, if you can, it's best. Mm-hmm. The second criteria that we kind of had here for picking a test would be, what are the concerns or the reason for the referral for the student? And again, this kind of hints back toward the MFUN is a lot of our referrals are for handwriting, and there is a small handwriting section in the MFUN. So if they're within that age range, I'm more likely to go toward that one.
Yeah.
So
yeah. And I think with handwriting too, if it's, they're copying letters or something like that, or we'll get referrals for, I'm thinking of why I would use the BOT. If I get a referral from a school psychologist that is saying, oh, their motor coordination was low on the BRE VMI, but their perception was high, and then their visual motor integration was low on those scores, I would likely use the BOT to get more information and try and tease out, okay, if they're accurately matching shapes and able to perceive the shape and process it and verbally tell you what it is, then it may be a coordination issue. So I would use the BOT.
Another one criteria that we had was what test was used with the student previously. So if you used the BOT previously, you may want to use the BOT again because you can compare and contrast scores. Same thing if a kid used the MFUN, the MFUN, back when they're in preschool, maybe before you had the student, and now they're 7 years, 8 months, you can still use the Miller Functional Assessment for one more time before you got to change it up because of their age. Another one that we had on here was time allotment. How much time do you have to complete this test? The BOT, I can tell you, it is definitely a lot less time. Not a lot less, but it is significantly less time to both administer and to score, especially if you only do the first 2 or 3 subtests.
Right. And I think, too, when you're looking at time allotment, the tests that you're comfortable with will go faster than the test you're not comfortable with. So for me, I tend to use the BOT a lot more than the MFUN just because I'm really used to it and I know the test very well, or at least the first 4 subtests I know pretty well. I'm sorry, first 4?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know them pretty well and I'm used to giving them so I can essentially, administer them and be fairly confident that my scores are going to be very reliable. So I tend to opt with that, and you can deliver it faster when you're familiar with it.
Definitely. All right. Well, that's what we wanted to wrap up for you today was those 3 objectives. So now you know a little bit about the MFUN and the BOT. You know what they assess. You know what kind of some of the pros and the cons are of using the BOT and the MFUN. And you kind of have heard a little bit about how we decide which test to use. With the time thing, I don't want to say, that it's something that we pick because we're in a rush to get assessments done.
No.
It's not that. It's just, some kids can't go for too long as well. And so you kind of have to break it up. And you can break both tests up very easily, but the BOT can be broken up a little more quickly.
Right. And I think, too, when you're looking at time allotment, that's that whole... You need to know the kid. So if you're noticing attention and executive functioning difficulties, you do need to pay attention to the amount of time you're pulling them for testing because it will impact the standardized scores on both of these assessments. They have to have good self-regulation in order to do things such as cut on the line and color in shapes and take their time with those things, or else their precision is going to look very poor when it's really probably not.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, that's going to wrap up episode number 6. As always, you can refer to our show notes for anything that we talked about. We'll have links to both a few things about the BOT as well as the MFUN at otschoolhouse.com/episode 6. All one word, episode, the number 6. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you will subscribe to both the podcast and our website at otschoolhouse.com. we keep on growing. You guys keep helping us out by sharing us on Facebook, on Twitter, everywhere. So we appreciate that. And we're just going to continue to bring you more content. So any last words, Abby?
Nothing. I'm just having a really good time making these podcasts. I think it's really fun, and I enjoy sharing information with other OTs. So like Jason said, if you like what you're hearing, please share us so that we can get, the word out and continue to bring you more information. Or if you have any constructive criticisms, not angry criticisms, please go ahead and shoot us an email, a direct message us. Follow us on Instagram and kind of share your input. If there's podcasts or things that you want to hear more information on, share that with us as well. We look to bring you guys information that you would enjoy hearing or that would better your practice, just like this is bettering ours.
Yep, definitely. So we look forward to many more podcasts in the future. We have some good ones already lined up coming up here soon. And we're trying to figure out how we're going to do podcasts over the summer. So stay tuned a little bit for that, and we'll let you know. All right. So have a good rest of your day, everyone, and enjoy the end of the school year coming up.
That's
Take
right.
care.
Thanks for stopping by.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the OT Schoolhouse Podcast. For more ways to help you and your students succeed right now, head on over to otschoolhouse.com. Until next time, class is dismissed.